Couple things as we dive into tonight. Tonight, I think you're going to experience things a little bit differently than you have in past weeks, and I hope that that's a good thing. Every now and then we'll do things to kind of shake things up, and your next couple weeks here are going to be each one different from the one that came before it. So I'm going to walk you through that schedule here. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about prayer. And as part of that, we're actually going to try some different things, talk about different ways of praying, different experiential ways of doing it. We're going to spend some time getting into that. And I'll even ask you to have some conversation around your table, which we've not done much of throughout these Wednesday nights. I'm also going to try to ask you to experience a few different ways of doing prayer, which is, again, something we haven't done on these Wednesday nights necessarily like that. Next week, you notice that the topic has just been what's up with a ... question mark, I think. What I'm actually going to do next week, and this may fail horribly, I don't know, but I'm going to call it Stump Your Pastor Night, where you get to ask any question you ever wanted to ask, and I'll stand here and try my best to answer it. Now, I'm going to warn you up front. If you ask me to get into the different theological perspectives of Paul Tillich and Karl Barth and compare them as contemporaries, but how different they were, it's been 35 years since I wrote that paper, so you're not going to get a very in-depth answer. Some of the questions you might ask may require me to say, I've got to do homework and get back to you. And please let that be a fair and okay answer, because what I don't want to do is just stand here and BS about something I don't know. But when I do know things, because I know there's been different people who have had different questions and so forth, and it can be kind of fun that way to have some of those. So be thinking up questions that you have maybe always wanted to ask and for whatever reason didn't have opportunity before. So that's what we're going to do next week. It's just a simple Stump Your Pastor game. The next week, actually, Dorothy Collins is going to be leading. I think that's April 2. If I'm not mistaken, if I'm counting on fingers and toes right going ahead. She's going to be the one leading that. More on that in a little bit. I just don't want to give too big of a commercial and then be wrong. So I think I know what she's doing, but I'd really rather get more fully prepped on that before telling everybody about it. On the 9th, we're going to do something totally different. And how many of you are familiar with the concept of spring cleaning in your home? My mother tried to teach me this and had, at best, intermittent success. But I'm actually going to invite us that evening to do it. We're going to have a real simple, informal meal together, and then there will be various things that we can do around this campus to help improve it. Now, some of the tasks can be done by people sitting at a table having conversation, just working around a table having conversation. Others could be people being out somewhere doing things. I'm not sure how dark it will get. We can kind of judge by tonight and see where we are. But for the most part, I think they're going to be more indoor jobs. Our staff is still putting those together and kind of getting there along with the property team and things like that. But the idea is that the Wednesday before Holy Week, we do some things to sort of improve our place here so that as people come for Holy Week and Easter, the place looks beautiful. So I know, for instance, one of the tasks, and Donnie may just take it on himself. I think he's kind of a runaway freight train this way. But the white cross out there in the thing, just painting it. Do you see how one of the top edges all kind of rusted and everything? Just little things like that we take on and say, hey, let's do this one thing and make it better. Make it prettier, make it more effective, or whatever the case may be. Different stuff like that around the campus. So that's coming up on the 9th. That may be, and then the 16th we don't meet because it is Holy Week that week. So that's maybe far enough ahead with commercials. One thing I have permission to share with all of you, and that as we talk about prayer tonight, is praying for others. Steve Spellman is rather suddenly in the hospital, and it is a brain bleed that he has suffered. They've identified that. They have moved from emergency to ICU. And right now they think they have it under control. They think that the medications they're applying are getting it to where it needs to be, and that he may completely avoid surgery. So right now things sound pretty good, and he's mainly sleeping. Peggy asked me not to come visiting right away today. She said he just needs to sleep right now. Let him do that. So I am. But I think that Noel and I may go tomorrow. Look for updates. Your prayer team, I know, has it, right, Lynn? And we're sending that out and around that way, and we will keep you updated. And for those of you who don't know who Steve Spellman is, I apologize for taking this, but many of you do know who he and Peggy are. We're learning as we go. And let's credit Josh, who not only prepared tonight's meal, but who, as a good deep thinker, realized, especially last week, we had food left over and very inadequate means for people to take that and take it home. So he went out and purchased a few hundred take-home containers, some of which he has put out there. And there is a third tray of pasta that is coming, or maybe already has, I'm not sure. So any of you that wish to, just scoop yourself up some. There's a to-go container and go. So we're trying to make that easier to do. The other thing that I'm going to beg, and I don't think I have to beg very hard, none of the cookies need to remain behind. They need to be gone before I come around at the end of the night, sort of, turn out the lights and shutting the doors. They have to be gone by then. So get those out. All the desserts have to be gone. I think that's it for getting us going stuff tonight. Okay, what I want you to do tonight around your tables, and some of you can look around your table and say, I have known these people for 4 decades. I know exactly who they are. In some cases, you can be like, I live with this person. I know exactly who they are. But what I want you to do anyways is have everybody around the table introduce themselves. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to simply say your name and maybe the how and when that you came to be a part of Christ Lutheran Church. Just that, and go around your table and do just that for now, okay? Go. I'm going to ask you guys, don't worry, I'm going to ask you to go around and talk some more again. And I'm going to ask you to keep your responses here somewhat brief. We're going to come back to this issue a lot as we talk about prayer. I don't necessarily want to get into specifics. One other thing I want to say at first. When I told you to introduce yourselves, even if you've known each other, like, you gave birth to her, you better know who the heck, yeah, both of them. You better know who they are. The reason I did that, I was in one church once in my role as an assistant to the bishop, so it was just a few years ago. And I asked people to go around and say their names. And there was one person who was like, well, this is stupid. We all know each other and everything else, and gave me a big thing about it, and okay. Somebody from the bishop's office shows up. Sometimes there are anger issues that are floating around the room. So it came out over my asking them to introduce themselves. But then afterwards, a guy came up to me and said, thank you so much for asking us to introduce ourselves. And he was very candid about why. He said for roughly 20-some years ago, when he joined the church, he met this really nice person. And they've been friends for 20 years, and they have talked for 20 years. He said hello every single Sunday morning since, but he was told her name on the very first day, forgot it by the second week that he came, and forever after that, he felt like it would be rude or stupid or shameful to ask her what her name was again. And for 20 years, he carried on a relationship not knowing her name, and he learned it that night, and he was so thankful. You'd think at some point you just got to break down and ask, right? But he was thankful I did it, so that's part of why I do it. So even if you don't know, now you know. But on a much lesser basis, sometimes that's true, isn't it? You get introduced to somebody once, and then after that it's, hi and whatever else, and very friendly, but you forget the name sometimes. And also a little bit of conversation helps just deepening that relationship. So now this next one, I'm going to ask you what might seem a little risky, and I hope and pray that there's absolutely zero occasion for either excessive pride or excessive shame, either or any shame at all. But it's to talk about where you're at in your prayer life, just in terms of right now it's really strong or right now it's pretty terrible. And I want to confess to you, as a pastor, over the 30-some years I've been a pastor, there have been times where I could answer that by saying my prayer life is actually pretty strong. It's going pretty well. Not being overly prideful about it, but I feel pretty grounded, pretty connected. Things are good on that front. There have been other times, though, while being a pastor, that I could answer, my prayer life is not in terribly great shape right now. And I could use other words to describe it too. But it's just really not doing so well. And then I have been at a whole bunch of markers in between those two extremes. And so as briefly as you can, and please, I don't want anybody to feel any kind of shame if they're on the side of saying, well, it's not really that great right now. That's okay. That's an all right space to be in right now. That's all right. But answer just with each other, how's your prayer life doing right now? And then if there's a short, appropriate answer to give for this, you can also pass on this if you want. When, where, or how, like time of day, particular method of praying, anything like that you use right now. Anything like that that's really helpful for you, or a place, or something else like that. Anything that's particularly useful to you in prayer. Do you feel like you have enough to do this? You need me to do anything else? Say any more? All right, go. Does everybody have that side there? Yep. Joe, you got the right one. Everybody at that table got it okay? Yep. I never know if they come out of the copy machine all in the same order or not. But looking at that back side. Now, one of the things that is true is that there are many different styles, types, ways of praying. There are different times of day that are helpful to people. There are different places that are helpful to people, different practices that are helpful to different people. And I want to be absolutely clear about this. What works for one person may be something that leaves another person just completely and utterly flat with nothing. Just that did nothing for me. Again, maybe this doesn't paint me in a great light, but I've been to a whole lot of spiritual retreats where I spent a majority of the time sitting there going, am I the only one that just doesn't get this? So the last one that I went to, and I really tried hard, they gave us these little cross-shaped things to then build a mosaic inside of. And I'm about as non-artsy a person as you can imagine. And entire chunks of our time together were spent on mosaics. And not being one with any particular artistic talent or way of doing these things, or finding it in any way a prayerful spiritual exercise, the making of this. Because again, I come with all my own anxieties. I'm not an artistic, creative person that way, and so I think mine's going to look bad. And so I start right away trying to have it just at least not look bad. And then I tend to rush through the process with all sorts of stress about it and just sort of get it done. And so then I had lots of time to just sit around while everybody else was having a great time doing mosaics. It just didn't do a whole lot for me. Patty quickly took that cross that I came home with. I felt like a kid bringing it to Patty and having her, hang it on the refrigerator kind of thing. She took it to the cross room, if you know where that is over there. So it's now hidden there. So if you want to see a really bad mosaic cross, you can go in there and play. Let's hunt for Pastor Sean's art project here. So there are things that just don't work for some people, and some things that really work well for others. The author of this particular sheet that I asked you to look at really tried to take seriously and talk about different types of intelligence that people have. I almost wanted to argue at that word right away, but we're just going to accept it for now and go forward. But different ways of experiencing and participating in the world, and types of prayers that might work for you. And I just kind of want to race through this a little bit. So verbal linguistic intelligence. Let me define, some of these are going to be obvious, others are not. The Lectio Divina, has anybody ever done that? Used that as a thing? We have at least a couple raising their hands. The idea is taking a short passage of Scripture and reading it over and over and over in a way and seeing what sticks out to you. Does a particular word jump out at you? Does something do that? And I've actually had this one work for me a couple times. Earlier in my ministry, not so much, but in my later years here, There have been a couple times I've done that and participated in that, and it's really, really worked for me. Different words have kind of risen out of it and helped me hear and experience that particular Bible passage in a different way. So that's that one. Praying with the scriptures. I guess that's probably somewhat obvious there. Journaling. Spiritual reading. I think what the authors meant by this is there are all kinds of books out there about spirituality and about praying and doing things like that. And actually just reading those and learning from them and where they are. And then poetry being one of the ones in there. We're going to come back to that one at some point too, the poetry. Mathematical, logical intelligence. Again, these are people who often like logic and form and things like that. And some of the things they do is just plain old Bible study. Really digging in and getting to it, where for some people they would say, well, that's not really prayer, that's a different thing. But for some people, that is a way of doing prayer, a way of connectivity to God, is by really diving into the scriptures, learning and growing from that process. And then, has anybody ever used a mandala before? Is that a new thing to folks? I should have put some pictures of mandalas up there. I didn't do it. Oftentimes, people think of them coming out of Hindu and Buddhist traditions, but it's a Sanskrit word that means circle. And they tend to be very elaborate, sort of little circle patterns. And again, you can make them on mosaics, you can draw them. There's such a thing as sand mandalas too, where the idea is you create and then uncreate right away by, remember those, what were they called? Those boards that you would write on and then pull the thing back and it would, Etch-a-Sketch, that's it, thank you. Doing that. What were the kaleidoscopes, the things that you would look through and do? A lot of mandalas end up looking like kaleidoscopes at the end. You know, those patterns of colors and shapes that come together. And again, that in the arrangement of those, in the creation of those, that there is something positive. I did take some pictures, or got some pictures of labyrinths. How many of you have ever walked a prayer labyrinth before? Anybody done that? I know we've had them here. I was told at one time, I think it was Diane Aldrich, made arrangements to get a big, like one that covered a chunk of this floor. And you've got a couple pictures back there for me, Gia, of labyrinths that we can put up. Now, you have to get out of your mind where my mind went the first time I heard, you want me to walk a labyrinth? So that's one there. There's a second picture. We can keep flopping back and forth between them. Go ahead and show the second picture. There you go. That's one that's one of those like carpet ones that they brought out and set on a floor there. And the idea is that down where this person is, there's one starting point, and there's really only one way to then get all the way through it and to keep going. It's not like there's choices. It's not a maze. How many of you are aware of the labyrinth from Greek mythology? They had a minotaur at the one end, like preying upon people, and there were all these dead ends. So that's what I'm thinking. A prayer labyrinth. First of all, where'd you find the minotaur? How much harm is the minotaur going to do? And how many people do you regularly lose on this? And I can see why under those conditions, people would be driven to prayer pretty quickly. But that's not what they were talking about at all. And I sometimes think of labyrinths of being really high hedges that keep you from being able to see around. This labyrinth doesn't at all. The idea is it's just on the floor, and you just walk it, and then you pray. And oftentimes near a labyrinth, especially the indoor ones, there can be little prayer cards there that invite you, however many turns there are in a labyrinth, that at every turn to pray for something different. Also, it can be fascinating. Can we go back to the outdoor one? Sometimes in outdoor ones, they are often in really beautiful settings. So there's a really nice one just up in Three Rivers at St. Anthony's up there. A lot of those retreat centers will have them. Is anybody aware of a labyrinth here in town? Is there one somewhere? You see one in a private yard. I guess they might, we could all hop in our cars one night and, we're on a prayer journey. Quit calling the cops. But in these outdoor ones, even in beautiful settings where I tend to get distracted looking around everything, I have surprised myself by how being in the labyrinth, I can feel like I'm just here. and let the outside world stuff go. And that's been something that sometimes has been helpful and powerful for me. So you see you have some stuff here with that logical thing, getting into kinetic things, which again is going to come up a little further down. Music. I have no musical talent whatsoever. I think you're all aware of this, especially if my mic gets left on Sunday. I really don't play any instruments. I can do about the first 5-6 chords of The Entertainer, if you remember that one. However, listening to music is something that is very, very powerful for me. It is fairly common that in the week leading up to a sermon, there will be a song that kind of stays with me throughout that. And sometimes they're the kind of music you would expect. So recently, I've really been into Celtic Christian worship, both using older hymns and more contemporary stuff. But the style of music is very much Celtic with bagpipes, the single pipe, violin, guitars, things of that nature. And I've just been on kind of a Celtic music thing, and a lot of my sermon prep time has been done with that. There have been other times when sermons have come together using the music of Van Halen. So, you know, things change depending upon where we are and things like that. But music can really help me. And they put down chant. Do any of you remember back in the 90s, I think it was, Gregorian chant kind of became the rage, and it got all the way up to #1 on the US Billboard chart. A bunch of monks had put together a chant CD, and it just shot through the charts and became a huge thing. People listening to Gregorian chant. Sometimes I absolutely love it. Other times I sit there thinking, wonder how much longer this service is going to be. You know, again, a lot of it's just where I'm at the time. Visual spatial intelligence. Again, this is getting into more tactile stuff, but meditating on icons. It's something we really don't do in the Western church. It's more of an Eastern church thing. Drawing, painting, or handcrafts. I have a really good friend who I've known now for decades. She is almost always knitting something. And I have become fascinated sometimes just watching her because she can be participating in something and still knitting. And I'm just amazed at how does this thing turn out as anything that looks good? Because you're not really paying attention to it. But there is something to the process of what she's doing that helps her to find a place of calm and of ability to listen and participate and do things like that, all while working with her hands. And then at the end of a lecture, she's got a hat or something that she made for a nephew. You know, I don't know how she does it, but she does it. And so that's some of the things there that sometimes people are able to do with handicrafts. Drawing, painting, whether it's the process of it or the final end thing of it. So I am not a painter or a drawer. My stick figures are sometimes hard to distinguish that that's actually a person. And I have a daughter who does amazing artwork. It's just incredible what she can produce. Sometimes, for me, paintings, pictures can help me get to a prayerful place and a good mindset. Whether it's pictures of friends and good times that I've had, whether for me nature scenes are one that really does it quite a bit. And being able to almost be transported to that place. You know, I don't know the history of this piece of art here at the other end of the hall, and I don't know how many of you sit in here and never really see it or pay it a bit of attention. Others, it may be something you look at very appreciatively every time you enter the room. I don't know. But a lot of times we use art that way to help us get to a more prayerful place. You see mandalas and photography, things like that coming up. Body kinesthetic intelligence. A lot of movement. Amanda, who used to work on our staff here, still participates in Bible studies and worship on Sunday and so forth. She does something called flag dancing, using flags and movement from those to do different things. But liturgical dance, I'm trying to remember, it was a Wednesday night, I believe, in Advent. And Noel's daughter did a little dance thing for us in the sanctuary that was really well done. And I was very impressed with it. And I have seen liturgical dance done well that was there. I've also seen it done not so well too. But the idea of moving and having something going. Prayer beads. Have any of you ever used prayer beads? A lot of people think that's a Catholic thing. Yeah, we don't do that. My friend Ashraf over in the Holy Land, he used olive wood, and he had this one that was cut into, it was a fish, cut into little pieces of the olive wood, making it with string attaching it in between. And he would pray throughout the day, just kind of almost fondling that, and then take the next one in, and another prayer on that one, then the next one. It was for him something that was really useful and helpful. And he taught it to me, and I have that, my fish, actually upstairs. I don't use it all that terribly often, but the times I do, something about the feel of the olive wood, and also probably the positive connection with Ashraf, helps me get into a prayerful place and be good that way. Interpersonal intelligence. Some people, when they pray, they need to pray alone. My mom was one of those. She was one of those, kids, I'm praying. And this may seem like an oxymoron, but when I'm praying, stay the heck away from me, or life expectancy is doing this, you know? She needed to be alone when she prayed. That was her way of doing prayer. I know other people who almost are the opposite. They need someone else. I need a prayer group where we get together, talk through the prayers, pray with each other, do sometimes responsive reading of the Psalms, other things like that, but I need connection with other people in order to pray, you know, that kind of thing going on. And then other people are all over the place, you know, and again, there's always extremes and then all the markers in between. I am a person who sometimes I'm very comfortable praying alone, but I'm also comfortable praying with others and being there. So I'm not necessarily just my mom's kid on that one. But the idea of praying together with others. They put down here corporate worship, you know, Sunday morning kind of thing. Working with a spiritual director. That can be something that can be very, very powerful and helpful. The daily office. I meant to bring down my prayer books and I didn't, sorry. I may try and run up at one of our breaks here and do that. And then the examine prayer. We're going to look at that one. We're going to examine the examine prayer in more detail in a moment. Interpersonal intelligence. Capacity to be self-aware and in tune with your feelings and sort of the process. So contemplation. A lot of people have that stereotype of monks sitting around contemplating their navel. But that idea of contemplative prayer, oftentimes very alone and very sort of searching on the inside. Journaling, writing out one's prayers. I want to share two examples of this. A woman by the name of Verna Roby in my very first parish. She was a tiny little woman, and she was always the first one to arrive on Sunday morning, and the reason was for safety. She drove the longest automobile I have ever seen in my life. It was one of those Oldsmobiles back in the 70s. Now this is in the 90s that I met her. But this thing was longer than most boats. And she was so small, I'm not kidding about this. It'll be a joke, but I'm not kidding. She had to look out the front window from under the steering wheel. She had that little window space there between where the steering wheel went over her eyes and the dashboard was just beneath. And that's all she could see because she was so small in stature. And she came to church early on Sunday mornings because the roads were pretty much empty. She probably shouldn't have been driving at all, honestly. And then it took her, and I was mean enough to count once. Have any of you ever done an 11-point turn? To get into the handicap spot there in front of the church. But I went to her home. I know that shocks you, that a pastor would be out seeing people in their houses. And she shared with me her prayers. And she had these spiral-bound notebooks, usually, most of them 75 pages, some of them were 100, and she would handwrite out her daily prayers. And she showed me how she had begun praying for me back when the congregation first heard my name as a potential candidate to come there, and all through the process, all through my first Sunday, and now we were a couple Sundays in when I was visiting her. And she'd been praying for me throughout all these spiral-bound notebooks that were there in her living room. And I learned right away there as a newbie pastor that I was going to be pastor to people whose prayer life was a whole lot deeper than my own. And she was incredible how she did it. I want to talk about somebody here in this congregation, Jim King. Many of you know him. He lived right next door. He was another one that wrote out his prayers in these elaborate prayer journals that he had, and he kept those. And again, when I went over and visited him, Jim shared with me some of the prayers that he had, praying for all sorts of people in this room now, other people on the staff and around this congregation, and for me. And it was one of those very humbling things to experience somebody else doing that. Now, I say all that with the deepest appreciation and being moved to the center of my being by the prayers that people doing this journaling thing have done. And then I tell you, I cannot journal prayers. It just doesn't work for me. You ask me to write, and my brain just switches into another place, and it doesn't work for me. But I am blown away by those for whom it does. So again, people have different experiences and ways of doing things that way. Let's keep going. Your last one down there, naturalist intelligence. Hiking, being in nature, gardening. Are there any of you for just the great outdoors can sometimes feel like more of a holy spot than the sanctuary does? Anybody ever end up in that kind of a place? Some of what I really appreciate about Chris Young and the work that he does out here on this courtyard is just that. It's almost helping to create a holy ground out here where sometimes I just need to get out of my office and just spend a little bit of time, even just right here, and it makes a difference. Also, on the part of our property that separates us from the housing next door, we have this incredible run of trees, thank you, John, these huge pine trees that run along the side of the building over here, and sometimes I'll just walk in their shade. And even between the buildings, I can almost reach out and touch our building on the right, and I don't want to offend whoever's just the other side of the fence, but I could practically reach out and touch their place. But having this row of trees can make me feel like I'm in a totally different place. Now, maybe not up in Sequoia Park or something like that, but there's a different smell. There's a different feel. There's hearing the wind through the needles and so forth that can make a difference. And do you see here, just on this sheet, all kinds of different ways that people tried to come up with, or one author came up that so many different kinds of prayers, and even just picking on married couples sitting around here, or moms and daughters, you can have people that live in the same household who one of these ways will really work for one of them and be absolutely nothing to the other. I mean, just not work. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Part of what tonight is about is helping to find a way of praying that for you might work. One other thing I want to do here is dive into some of what people have done. So on that interpersonal intelligence, there with the contemplation, the journaling, and things of that nature, I want to tell you a story of someone that you may not have heard of named Howard Thurman. He was born 1899 and lived into the 1980s, and he was an African-American theologian. He, in the town, he grew up in the South. I want to say it was Mississippi. And for black kids, school stopped at 7th grade. You couldn't go any further if you were, in a sense, the wrong race. However, somehow he got out of that. I don't know his full story, but he got out of the deeper South and found people up in New York and New England areas where he was able to finish his education of high school, college, seminary, become a doctorate, become an author of over 20 books. Now, you would not find him at the civil rights movement being out there walking arm in arm with Dr. King and getting beaten on with clubs or anything else, or turn fire hoses on or anything else like that. He was not a rah-rah, I'm out here. Even though he was a pastor, he was not that great of a public speaker necessarily. And he did okay, but it wasn't his forte. For him, it was the written word and what he could do. And Dr. King, almost every time he was arrested, one of the things that they had take off of him and record his the evidence and possession was one of Howard Thurman's books that so undergirded Dr. King and what he was doing in terms of resisting and going forward. And so you can have two people from similar sort of backgrounds who end up in different places. And when Howard Thurman was asked about, what is the key to your being able to formulate this thought and author these books and do these things, and he said, it is quiet. To be able to have silence, because in our world there is so little of it. And I would say from the 1980s when he passed away to today, there's even less silence. These little mobile devices that we carry around with us everywhere tend to bring their own level of noise and distraction with them. And then there's just so much other stuff just kind of out there. But for him, it was quiet. Just simply quiet. Nothing else to it, he said. You don't have to dress it up. You don't have to light candles. You don't have to, just quiet. Because we get that so little, for him, it became everything. And maybe in our prayer lives, we need to find some quiet. Now, I know other people who you put them into quietness, and that's just going to make them crazy, right? There are some for whom quiet is just not a welcome thing at all. And again, that's okay. Different ways of being. I want you to look at the examine prayer. It is your very first thing here. Tell you a story of a Frenchman, Ignio is his name, and he was a party animal. He grew up in a Christian household, but for the most part rejected that. He was good looking, athletic. He was sort of that dreamboat kind of guy, and he lived that to the fullest as he could. And then he found himself in the army as war came to his area, and he approached that with the same bravado he did everything else. And there's one famous story about him that he led a doomed charge, but it bought time for other things to happen, which ended up being good. But he led a charge into an impossible situation, and sure enough, a cannon of the enemy went off, and a cannonball went right through his left leg, completely shattering it, and leaving him a lame cripple for the rest of his life. And in that recovery process, when many times he prayed just to be dead, rather than go through life as a cripple, he really struggled and wrestled with his faith and came to a much deeper faith, and he ended up taking on a different form of his name, and many of you might know him as Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. And part of his prayer life was this examine prayer that you see on page 1. So if you go to the very front of things, I believe that's there, and you can look at both sides of that first sheet. It's the examine prayer done in 2 different ways. I found 2 different forms of it to use. But the idea is to, at the end of a day, is when he suggested doing this. I suppose you could do it the next morning about yesterday, looking into today. But the idea was to go over your life and to say, in what ways did I really feel and experience the presence of God? Were there times throughout the day when I felt like God was absent? Each of these questions in the examine prayer is sort of a mirror of the other. With our youth groups, we often say, what are your highs and lows from this last day or last week? And we ask our youth to say, well, the really good thing was this, the not so good thing was that. It's a form of the examen prayer. And we're not going to go through it in any great depth tonight, but I want you to be able to take that home and again see if something like that is useful to you. And what Ignatius tried to do with this prayer was to encourage people to really sort of look back on the day and take account of where God was, and that over the course of time, he believed, and it seems to bear out with experience, that the more we ask the question of where was God present and God alive and God at work, the more we ask that question, the more times we'll actually see that God was and is indeed alive and at work in our lives. So when we first start, we might think, well, once yesterday. There was this one short time. But that after a few months of this, we might say, no, I saw God at work in all kinds of different times and places and things along the way. Everybody get the idea behind the examen prayer there? Let me talk about Thomas Merton. Catholic scholar, died in 1968, was born right around the First World War kind of time frame. I think it was 54 when he died. Deep Catholic thinker, incredible author of, gosh, I should have notes about this in front of me, but I want to say something like 200 books, something like that. He was an incredibly prolific author. And a lot of things that he talked about was prayer and finding God in the everyday. If you look at pages 3 and 4, it's another back-to-back one. You see it talks about breathing, about breath. And here's one where I'm actually going to ask us to do something experiential together, sort of following Thomas Merton's way of being. Sorry, you're having to move your camera around here for me. But the first thing I'm going to ask everybody to do is just to kind of center yourself in your chair. Try and get your back as straight as you can, feet flat on the floor. Carolyn, I have to have fun with you this evening. Where is Carol? There she is. She does all kinds of great songs for our preschool kids, and some of them are, stand up for Jesus, sit back down, stand up, sit down, and you're doing calisthenics when you're doing these things. But now that we've gone younger kids, their feet don't touch the floor. Their feet barely stick off the edge here. And for them to stand up, it is a process of them turning around, kind of pushing themselves, get their feet down, then stand up. And now we're like 3 more choruses into they should have been up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. It was kind of funny. Carolyn was having fun with that the other day, that these young kids just can't do that. So hopefully your feet, for the most part, can reach the floor here and get there. And however you can do it, just to kind of have as straight a back as you can, be in your chair, have your feet firmly planted, your hands just either open, flat, or upright, doesn't really matter, but maybe on your legs there. And just to be able to take a moment and then breathe. And I'm going to ask you to kind of take it in through your nose, hold it for a couple counts, and then out through your mouth. Take a few moments, just do that a few times. Okay, now I'm going to add another element to it. If you look at your sheet on the front page of that one, you're going to notice the one with the kind of the green border around it. At the bottom down there, he has all sorts of phrases kind of broken by a slash mark. The first one's, I think, just Jesus, breaking his name into 2 syllables. And the idea is that the part before the slash mark, you think that word as you bring the breath in, and then after the slash mark, as the breath goes out. So do you get that breathe in, breathe out with that slash mark? Everybody see where I'm at there on that page? Pick some of those and take some time and just do that on your own right now. Breathing in and breathing out with those words. Now I'm going to ask you to take a break, and this next one we're going to do is a group exercise. If you wish to, in a sense, cheat, you can see the back side of that breath prayer, this colorful one you can see. And the pattern is, I receive your love, breathing in, and I release my insecurity. Do you see how that works? The idea is something comes in, something else comes out. What I'm going to ask all of us to do, kind of in unison here, I'm going to read through this out loud, all of these ones here. I'll ask you to breathe in, hold it for about 2 counts, and then I'm going to do the, and I release my part there as you then breathe out. Please, if any of you get lightheaded, feel like you're going to pass out, anything else like that, because I'm interrupting your normal breathing, stop. Breathe normally. The idea is that this doesn't do any harm to anybody, okay? But also there's something about trying to do this together. Yes? I do have extras. Here's a whole stack of extras here. There you go. So let me give you just about 5 to 10 seconds to kind of get there, and then be prepared to breathe in as I say, I receive your love, hold it for about 2 counts, and then I'll say, and release my insecurity, and we'll breathe out together. Everybody got this? All right. What? Yes?
I read something, receive, let it go.
Yep, very similar thing. Taking your hands and saying, on the breathe in part, I receive, and then flipping your hands over at the, and I release. It's combining some of those kinesthetic things that way. If you wish to add that, by all means do so. Prepare to breathe in. I receive your love and release my insecurity. I receive your joy and release my unhappiness. I receive your peace and release my anxiety. I receive your patience and release my impulsiveness. I receive your kindness and release my indifference. I receive your goodness and release my ungodliness. I receive your faithfulness and release my disloyalty. I receive your gentleness and release my severity. I receive your self-control and I release my self-indulgence. Amen. Now again, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot and say, what was that like for you? But I do want to share a couple things again here, just about me as an example. Almost every time that I take the time and the effort to do some form of these breath-based prayers, where I pay attention to my posture, where I actually try and quiet other things down. Maybe sometimes I've even done these while music is playing. But do this in and out and focus on that. And whether I use these specific words or others or none, just the breath, almost every time I find that changes me and is good for me and is better for me. And I do it very infrequently. I don't know why. My main go-to style of prayer is an ongoing rambling conversation with God that happens throughout the entire day as I'm just going about doing other things. Sometimes people think, is he talking to himself? Because sometimes I even do it out loud, all right? And I may have people wanting to come test my sanity with a dipstick. But I do that. I just have this rambling conversation, whether it's in my head or out loud or a combination of both throughout the day. And that works for me. It keeps me connected, and things about that can be good. But also, this stopping, I don't stop very often until I'm asleep, but stopping, paying attention to posture, paying attention to God's presence, paying attention to my own breathing helps, and it matters, and it really works well for me. If this works for any of you, I'm thrilled, and you have that piece there for you. Some other methodologies of prayer. I want to introduce you to a couple people that you may not know from history. You know me, the history nerd. I have to do this stuff. But in some of the doing things, there were some that I found that were not present on this page. A couple months ago, you know how over at Sequoia Village we serve a meal one Thursday a month. And you're also familiar with the warming center, which during the coldest months we have open and we can just go and help check people in and do things like that. Both of those events for me became prayer-based events and were incredibly helpful to me each time I've done either of those two things. And I've been able to go do it at times that were helpful. Now, one time it got sprung on me. Bernie actually called me and just said, Pastor, we're short. You got a chance you can cover this thing? And I said yes to him and was so thankful I did. Because there was something about getting out of whatever was going on in my head and in my little part of the world and to go and meet other people and have those conversations and be in that place and have an opportunity to legitimately just serve did something amazing for me. And it made a difference in my life. And I came away each of the times I've done that feeling in some way that the people I was supposedly called to serve did more of a service for me than I did for them. And that's an incredible thing to experience. You ever want me to go on way too long? Ask me about my experience post-Hurricane Katrina, as Lutherans came from all over the place and came to help in that recovery process. And every single week, the people who came would always end up saying, oh my goodness, our lives have been changed because of this, and yet they did so much for us that were there in Louisiana. There is something about service itself that really matters. And I want to share a story of two different people, just super briefly, that do this. You may know some of their names. That's entirely possible that way. But Fannie Lou Hamer, any of you know of her? Born in 1917 to 1977. She, African-American woman, grew up as the poorest of the poor with all kinds of just horrible life experiences there in the South. And she was a cotton picker. For all practical purposes in Jim Crow South, slavery just continued. It was called something different. It was dressed up a little differently, but the actual results of it were, in a lot of ways, almost the same. And going through all that violent racism and everything else that she did. And yet something happened in this incredibly poor woman with almost no education, no kind of background. She ended up, of course, excluded from voting, not allowed to vote. And she went and became part of the group that went to the 1964 National Democratic Convention when they were applying for the Civil Rights Act to actually extend to voter rights and to secure all of that. And here, this little girl who grew up for 12 years picking cotton and cotton fields ends up at the microphone. And you may not remember where this comes from, but it was actually heard when she said, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. Everybody remember that statement? That's where it comes from, is from her. And she found for her that quiet, contemplative prayer didn't work, all kinds of things like that were not her. Hers was in actually being about bringing change. That for her, in order for her to feel the presence of the Spirit and people and God moving amongst the people, it was in those demonstrations. It was in those very public things where she worked so hard to make a difference for those around her. And of course, you know then that in 1965, the Civil Rights Act and the Voters' Rights Act were passed there and what she worked on. The other two people, I'm guessing none of you have heard from them. Bernie, maybe. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Hans Scholl and Sophie Scholl. One born 1918, one 1921. Both died in 1942. Just from those dates, you can probably guess from the sound of their last name. Both of them were young kids growing up, 20-somethings with all the fire and passion that only 20-somethings can ever summon up, right? And they were watching Nazi Germany form all around them there in their hometown. And from a faith perspective in particular, they said, we have to resist this. This cannot go on. And they ended up founding this group of young radicals. Their main form of sharing the news was actually graffiti all over towns and cities, really, in Germany. And talking about the presence of the light of Christ, about the need for freedom, for equality, for all sorts of things that way that the Nazis were trying to completely stamp out. And they did all sorts of anti-Nazi slogans and things like that, stirred up all kinds of demonstrations, and you can imagine where that ended. Bernie, I'm going to quote Hans. They actually used a guillotine. The Nazis were creative in their use of different means of execution throughout the years. They used just about everything they could come up with. Hans was guillotined. And as the guillotine fell, he shouted, "Eis lebe die Freiheit." Did I come close with that one? Long live freedom. Again, not letting that out. And then Sophie, too, after she was put to death, they went back to her cell, and on the back of the very court paper condemning her to death, one word was penciled in ornate letters: Freiheit, freedom. And never losing that spirit and always keeping that going. And our history is filled with people who find God and find prayer sometimes in very activist ways. You know, oftentimes we think of prayer as go into your little prayer corner, fold your hands, bow your head. You know, it's a very sort of tucked in thing. Whereas for some people, prayer is in action, is in doing, is a much more outward thing there. And again, tonight, if you come away with nothing else, I hope you come away with this. That prayer can be done in all kinds of different ways, times, places, spaces. Some find our prayer crossroom, that little prayer chapel there, really helpful. Others might find it claustrophobic. Some really appreciate the sanctuary and all that goes in there. And I will tell you, there are times, of course, I love it full on a Sunday morning, but there's many times I go in there when I'm all by myself. Or maybe Jack is lurking in the booth. I'm not really aware he's there. But I can find that really helpful. I've already told you, being outside, that's one of the places that I really feel like I'm kind of in God's cathedral when I'm in places like Sequoia, things like that are just absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. And also, even just my morning walk with Sam, and just seeing the way that people tend their landscapes and grow their gardens and do things like that as Sam walks by, piddling on each of them. But I can really have that deep appreciation for God's presence, even just in the simplicity around our communities that way. And it can be really, really helpful for me. I sincerely hope that tonight has been helpful for you, that some of you probably came in feeling like my prayer life's in a pretty strong place and I feel like I'm doing okay. I hope this was still helpful for you. And I'm guessing there are some of you that came in saying, right now my prayer life isn't in that good a shape. I hope that there's some nuggets you can take away from tonight to be able to work with or say, I'm going to give this a try. And there might be some of you that, whether your friends live in different homes or your people that actually live together, who say, let's do this one together. Let's try this and partner up that way. That's great. Some of you may say, there are things I want to just do on my own. And I don't even want anybody else to know I'm doing it, darn it. And that's okay too. But that's my hope and my prayer for each of you tonight, is that you found something useful that you can take away from this and be able to move forward in your prayer life. And if any of you need further conversation after, just ask. Thanks so much for being here tonight.